situation regarding Amoris Laetitia, and what prognosis might we anticipate in the situation with the dubia, Cardinals Bramwell and Burke, and are any other bishops pre-signing on to support them, and how are we doing on that situation?
Yes, the issue of Amoris Laetitia and is getting more confused. It is evident, we cannot deny this. Recently I read a new bishop in North Italy. The region, this episcopal region of North Italy, they published almost the same norms as the Argentinian bishops. It seems that one is copying from the other. And so it is growing ever more. Almost the same formulations. As yesterday we heard, it's not feasible to live in continents. So, and this bishop, he is from this region, and he now explains this, that now with these norms to apply Amoris Laetitia, this bishop said that we have to distinguish between the indissolubility of marriage, which is one thing, indissolubility, and the marriage is breakable. And so there is now two concepts, indissoluble and breakable. So the marriage is indissoluble but can be broken. Yes, the bishop stated this, and this is the spirit of Amoris Laetitia. And then when this broken marriage, he said, then we have to start a process of accompaniment and discernment with these two, with this couple, with a broken marriage. And then after a time of accompaniment, we can bless this union and recognize the validity of the second marriage. Literally, a bishop of Italy, in North Italy, recently, as a consequence of the pastoral norms which they published as applying Amoris Laetitia. So it is evermore, in some way, it is a general attack on the indissolubility of the marriage and a practical introduction of divorce in Catholic Church, which the Church 2000 years resisted to divorce, even to the extent and at the price of martyrs. The first martyr is, as you know, St. John the Baptist for the indissolubility of marriage, and then the famous Cardinal Fisher, John Fisher, and Thomas More, and so many others also, maybe unknown. And so we are witnessing that from the top of the Church, from the Vatican, from the Holy See, the Pope, there is in some way a collaboration to introduce in the practice the divorce in Catholic Church. And so it is very serious, and some bishops of Kazakhstan and myself, we published in the December 31, the Feast of Holy Family, a public profession of truth regarding the sacramental marriage. You know maybe this text. And since now they join publicly this our profession, now we have 10 bishops who by their name gave their name to this text and asked to be published their name. So we are now 10 bishops at least. But I know other bishops who said to me, I am agreeing with your text, it's completely good, but I cannot sign the text because I am fearing of persecutions and repressals and so on, maybe from the Vatican even. So there are a number of priests bishops, are really intimidated. Even so, they are agreeing with our statements and with the dubia of the cardinals. And so also some cardinals. And this is the situation. I don't know what will be the next step or the final of the process of the dubia. Now there remained only two cardinals of the dubia, alive, Cardinal Burke and Brandmüller. I have not spoken concretely with these two cardinals what they will do. So, but I think that we can only be bishops and cardinals. We can only publicly formulate and state the immutable teaching of the Church and the immutable practice of the Church. Not only teaching, but also the practice. This is the deceit which this party introduces. They say the doctrine remains, but the practice can be changed. No, the practice cannot be changed. Also, we have to state this. And so I think this is the one from the side of us bishops, publicly state the truth. We cannot directly judge the Pope because the Pope, this is a principle of Catholicism, that the Pope cannot be judged by no one. Otherwise we will change the hierarchical structure of the Church and we will not be more Catholics, we will be a kind of Protestant style, because in the Protestants and the Orthodox they can judge the superior. The Pope is the last one which got put the structure of the Church, and the bishops cannot judge the Pope. This is hierarchically impossible. And even a council, a general council, cannot judge a Pope, a living Pope, already a dead Pope, after his death, he can be judged by a following council or a following Pope. And this happened already in the Church history, you know. Well, prima sedes anemine judicatur. This is a principle of the 4th century already. So, what we can do, we can only admonish the Pope. And admonition is not a judgment of the Pope. You know, admonition. We can admonish the Pope reverently, always with respect, and asking him to correct the situation. Even privately, when it's not possible privately, we can do this publicly, but in a very respectful manner, I would say in an indirect manner. And so, when we state the truth of the Church, this is a kind of indirect correction of the Pope, an indirect admonition. And I think that this is the only one possibility, because the other direct confrontation and correction would be cause more harm, more confusion and division, and will not bring ultimately the good. But stating and repeating the truth, this is what will be spread, and this we want. We want clarity and so on. And to judge the Pope, we have to leave this to God. And He will do it in due time. And in the meantime, we have always to pray for the Pope. We have to pray for the Pope assiduously, fervently, and asking that he will be illuminated to stop this confusion. this is, to my opinion, the only way, and not only pray, sacrifice, to bring sacrifice. And there are, I think, a lot of hidden expiatory souls in the church who in a hidden way sacrifice themselves and their life for the Pope, that he may change, in this case, his behavior, and confront the church in a very clear, unambiguous manner. So this is for me the only way, and God will intervene always, as he did in the church history.
We have a group of Catholic cardinals and bishops in the United States. They're called to action, and it's being led by Cardinal Cupich, and they're going to have 3 different meetings. One's going to be in Santa Clara here, headed up by Auxiliary Bishop McElroy and others. But it's to push the Amoris Laetitia, and to push marriage for the divorced and remarried. So they're really putting together this huge movement, and we need our bishops and our cardinals who believe in the teachings, the doctrine that it's always meant to speak up. And I get very sad when I hear that there are bishops and cardinals that are afraid to speak up. I mean, I feel that they need to speak up. The other side has no problem speaking up. They have this huge movement going on. And I'm worried about our priests and our those in the United States that are going to be swayed by this big movement that's going to come about. So I was just wondering if maybe, Father Ilo, how do you feel about that as a priest, you know, knowing that there are bishops in the United States who are really going to be pushing this, and how and what we could do to offset that, encouraging bishops to speak up.
A bishop told me, a very good conservative bishop, during some of these crises, he was asked why the conservative bishops don't get together as kind of a lobby, not a lobby, but
A movement.
yeah, support. Why don't they support each other? And he said, well, we're conservative. Our tendency is to pull back, to retreat into prayer. And so I think it's a temperamental, part of it's a temperament issue that by nature, liberal people are activists and conservatives aren't. But there must come a time when conservative bishops and priests need to get together. I think there will be a breaking point at some point. The bishop said, of course, that God will intervene, and we believe that. We are serene in that confidence of God's providence. What can we do? Well, of course, pray, as the bishop said in his homily this morning. The most effective means of protecting the church is the Holy Mass, the reverent reception and prayer of the Holy Mass. In terms of human action, it's important to become friendly with your bishops and priests instead of throwing up our hands and becoming frustrated. And as my own ordinary Archbishop Cordileone said, a lot can be done just by people speaking with each other, getting to know each other. And then from there, we don't want the conservative or traditionalist part of the church to seem antagonistic to the bishops that are most open to hearing them. And so we need to avoid the temptation of becoming frustrated and speaking in a manner that can put off some of the bishops. It's not really in our hands, except those who are bishops and cardinals. Most of us have to simply trust and act respectfully, not only to the Pope, but also to our bishops and cardinals, even when their behavior is frustrating. So that's about as much as I can say about that. Perhaps Chris would like to address that.
Yes, you, lady, you asked the question of these actions of Cardinal Supich and the other bishops to make these seminars on promoting this wrong interpretation and application of Amoris Laetitia. I think that this whole stuff is ultimately not convincing, because this is not true, what they are saying. It is not true. And I remind a saying of Saint Ambrose from the 4th century, where he was also facing some, in those times, liberal Arian bishops in the 4th century. And he said a phrase in Latin, simplicitas fidei maior est ambitiosa mendatio eloquentiae. Means the simple faith is stronger, more powerful than deceitful ambition of eloquence. Only. So it's only a matter of eloquence, ambitious, deceitful eloquence. These all stuff. But the simplicity of faith, of yours and the people, it's stronger than all these seminars and eloquence which they do. They will collapse. It cannot have consistency.
One of the themes of this conference is the help that Our Lady of Fatima can bring to the situation in the church. And I want to ask you, Bishop Schneider, I know you have a devotion to Our Lady of Fatima, that you helped build a cathedral in her name in Kazakhstan, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about what kind of help she can be to us in this situation we face right now.
Yesterday, Father Aylot spoke so beautiful about the meaning of the message of Fatima in the current crisis of the Church, especially related to the Eucharist. I think that we have to believe that Our Lady, she told that my Immaculate Heart will triumph. Will. So we have to believe in this faith, and this will come. And what does mean the triumph of the Immaculate Heart? It does mean that they will triumph before the Eucharist, our King in the Eucharist, our Lord. So when our Lord in the Eucharist is again venerated and put in the center in the Holy Communion, in the manner to celebrate Mass, and when there is again given the most highest honors to our Eucharistic Jesus, then the Immaculate Heart will be joyful, will triumph. Our Lady wants nothing for her. All what she wants is for her Son, for the mystical body of His Son to flourish. And so, to my opinion, it is first, the Church has to be restored, the Eucharistic kingdom of Christ in all its splendor and dignity. And then will come the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. But this is prepared by, as we already told, by the prayers and by the means which Our Lady indicated us. You know, the Rosary, the devotion of the 5 first Saturdays, the Spirit of Expiation, and the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart in a specific and explicit manner. And this has still to come.
you, Your Eminence, for being here, and Father Ilo and everybody who's participated. I, as a layman, cannot judge the Pope, but a short question. Can a Pope Emeritus judge the Pope?
No, I don't know, because a Pope Emeritus is not more a Pope. He is not a Pope. There can only be one Pope. We are the hierarchical church. We are one head. There are not two. A monster with two heads. The church. No, it's one head. Pope Francis is the real Pope. Pope Benedict is not more Pope. He is a simple bishop now. As I'm a bishop, he is a member of the Episcopal College. And to my opinion, it's not correct that he is vesting the papal vestments and the title. It has never been in the entire history of it. This is contradicting the reality. He is not a Pope. He was a Pope, but now he is not more Pope. And he has to vest and to behave himself as not more Pope. And so he is in the same situation as a bishop or a cardinal.
Remember the principle of the excluded middle? Or rather, a pope or not a pope. But they've created a gray area here too by this novelty of the Pope Emeritus, who dresses like the Pope, wears even the papal ring, has papal insignia. I don't know what to make of it, but it doesn't make any sense. And it's led to some speculation by some pretty conservative spokesmen about what it all means. But so far as we know, Francis is the Pope. It's not for us to say otherwise.
He's a transport.
Well, this is just another example of how gray areas are being created through novelties and terminology.
May I go ahead? I'm looking at the New Testament and saying, there was only one Pope back at the time of St. Peter, but St. Paul publicly rebuked him. So he was just another bishop. Why can't we do that again? We have the precedent. St. Paul rebuked St. Peter, and St. Peter was wrong. He told him he was wrong publicly. So we have the precedents.
Yes, you are correct. I'm agreeing with you. Yes. But as I repeated, in order not to, since the confusion is very great, very big in the church, now we have a kind of a gray zone of a Pope Emeritus, not clear what is this, and then all these divisions in the church. I think in this case would be a formal correction of the Pope, as did some Paul, to my opinion, not productive, not efficient, or not, because we have to always to calculate what will be the consequence of this action, the consequence, because by correction of the Pope, I have to have the, how do you say, the certainty that this, my action, will produce an effect, a positive effect on the Pope firstly. But now, as Pope Francis is, it is humanly spoken without hope. To make him publicly a correction, it could be turned worse, because he has apparently an attitude which does not accept corrections. At least he, I say apparently, at least he behaved himself in this manner towards the cardinals of the Dubia. It is for me an example that he did not like in such a way a correction. And therefore, when we will do the same, it would be the same without effect. So, but when I could, in the situation with Paul was another. Because St. Paul, he knew Peter. And he was, to my opinion, convicted that Peter will hear his correction and he will accept. So he had known Peter, and therefore he made a public correction in the face of the entire Antioch church to Peter. And Peter was so humble that he accepted the correction. And it was salutary. But I don't know if this will be the case of Pope Francis. So, I mean, we have to ponder the situations. But Saint Caterina of Siena, you know, the doctor of church, she made corrections to the Pope. She had nothing to lose. She was no bishop, no cardinal. She could not be deposed. She was already on the lowest level of the...
So he's saying I should do it?
But you know, there already some good faithful with a reverent spirit made public corrections to Pope Francis. I wrote already some texts. I don't like the irreverent corrections. The corrections has to be made with reverence towards the office of the Pope. And there were corrections. One example of the United States. One priest of the United States, a theologian whom you know maybe, Thomas Benandi, he made a public correction of the Pope in a letter. You know this letter maybe. And it was respectful. It was clear. It was in a filial courage, but respectfully. And he made, this was a correction of a priest, and they were also lay people. And so, but Saint Caterina of Siena, she made a lot of, and once she wrote Saint Caterina a letter to the Pope, the Pope of those times, who had a very bad behavior. Pope Urban VI, he made a damage for the church. He was not promoting heresy, but he promoted a confusion of the church and the schism. And then she wrote him several letters to admonish him to correct his behavior. And the Pope did not correct his behavior. And then she wrote him a letter, ultimately, but very, very, how to say, reverently, Most Holy Father, you are the sweet Christ on earth. But if you don't change your behavior, please renounce the papacy. So, a doctor of the church, she asked the Pope to renounce if he will not change his bad behavior. And she was really, writing this letter. So, we have some examples, but ultimately we have to pray.
I have a comment and a question. Comment is, I think it's really important for everybody, probably everybody here does it already, but I'm always encouraging people that when a bishop, cardinal, priest, Monsignor, whoever does say something, come out publicly, courageously, respectfully, I think it's so important for us to take the time to contact them, either phone call, email, letter, however you want to do it, and thank them. And I've done it, my friends have done it, and generally we get a response back, and they're so grateful because the problem is the bad news travels really fast, and so they get all the critical backlash, but they don't always, we might say, oh, that's great, but we don't tell them that's great. And so by telling them, we're encouraging them to keep it up. And there's also a website, Courageous Priest, and the two men, they publish courageous priests and cardinals and everything in between when they come out with articles or homilies or whatever. So it's really important. My question is, and I suppose for you, Your Excellency, there was a priest in Italy just recently who was excommunicated because he wouldn't sign a declaration of fidelity, I guess, to Pope Francis. It wasn't to the magisterium, it was to Pope Francis, and I believe it was to the Vatican, Vatican II. And he was excommunicated. And we've been kind of talking about this. If a prelate is heretical, actually spewing heresy, and they excommunicate a person, a priest, whoever, is it valid? Is it valid that they're excommunicated and then they? I'm just wondering, because I guess my fear is down the road when the line in the sand is drawn and we laity and priests have to decide which way we're going. Are we going with the heretical church or are we going with the mystical body? There could be, they could say, well, you just excommunicated yourself, and we may not have any priests to administer the sacraments. That's my concern. So is that valid if they're in heresies and they're actually the schismatic, although they've taken over?
I think that in this case, when this is happened, so I have not analyzed concretely this case, but when it is so that he was excommunicated because he did not sign a declaration of fidelity to the person of the Pope, I don't know the exact formulation well. It could be, to my opinion, humanly spoken, because excommunication is a pastoral action of a church, a pastoral action, and this can be erroneous, it can be a fault. So the church has not the infallibility in pastoral decisions or in disciplinary decisions. So it is a pure, in some way, human decision, but it could be in the eyes of the bishop and the canon law, it could be valid, but to my opinion, not in the eyes of God in this case. And we had examples in the history of the church. For example, when the Pope Liberius excommunicated Saint Athanasius. Was it valid? I think in the eyes of God it was invalid, because Saint Athanasius was one of the greatest defenders of the faith. And the Pope Liberius, he yielded and signed a declaration which created confusion in the church in those times. And so we have a lot of examples in the history of the church. I think in this concrete case I have not studied, but when it is so, it is for me, in the eyes of God, not valid.
Also, closer to our own time, we're probably all familiar with what Padre Pio suffered when he landed on the wrong side of Vatican politics. And his example of simply going back into prayer, Lenten prayer and penance, being obedient, eventually that passed. As it's been said a few times in this conference, exiles are not forever. Athanasius came back a few times, and so not to panic when these kinds of things happen, but I think Chris's talk yesterday was also very encouraging in that we have all of the means, all the grace and wisdom in the church, within the church that is needed, and so there's no reason to lose our serenity over any of this.
I'd like to read a quote from a book that my wife picked up yesterday here at the conference. It's by Cardinal Ottaviani. If either any of you care to comment, you may. Certainly your comments already reflect upon this, but I think it really puts an exclamation point on the situation we find ourselves in at this crisis of identity. So here's Cardinal Ottaviani in 1973. He says, "It should be clearly shown how the Supreme Pontificate was then," and he's talking about during the time of Lepanto, Pius V. "It should be clearly shown how the Supreme Pontificate was then, and always will be, the effective bulwark of salvation. I wrote once and wish to repeat today this indisputable judgment on the mission of Papal Rome. All sorrow, disaster, darkness, or persecution are nothing when we have the certainty that among men there is and ever will be a man in whom the light of everlasting truth can never fail. The night of the world is dark for us, but never starless. There is the Pope." End quote.
To bring up another topic, the coming battle over Humani Vitae, just curious if that's laying the groundwork for this other crisis that seems to be afflicting the church in the homosexual clergy and all the push for acceptance of that in the faith. I mean, because it seems like contraception is just like the same thing is what that is, and how that might be playing into or behind the scenes of some of this push.
It is an agenda, you know. We are seeing all these as an agenda, ultimately a total relativism of truth and of what is good and evil, what is true and wrong. This is our ultimate root of our crisis, since the modernism which Pius X condemned, but they went in the underground and they were prepared in the ground until Vatican II, and in Vatican II they took the power over, or mostly, and used the Vatican II as a catalyst to spread the modernism. And what is modernism? Pius X said modernism is the synthesis of all heresies. And what is this root of the synthesis? This is absolute relativism. It means that there is no truth stable, nor intellectual, nor moral. So, what does this mean, this ultimately? You, yourself, human being, we are who decide what is now true and what is now good. We. And after us, the other generation will decide. This is our situation. And and this is going on, applying step by step to all the issues, the most important issues of our moral life. Started with the marriage, no? The family, and then all the topics which we mentioned already, divorce, contraception, and then homosexuality. It will be, of course, in some way the logical next step. To completely, it is ultimately to abolish sin and to give the permission, and not only the permission, the legitimization of sin itself. So you are free to sin, and we give the blessing for sin, even. This is our situation, and this is apostasy. This is true apostasy, and philosophically, this is gnosis, Gnosticism. Gnosticism, one of the main basic of the Gnosticisms was that there is, from one side, the intellectual knowledge. Gnosis means knowledge, and in the other side, it is the practical life, which can be definitely contrary. This was the Gnostic, one of the Gnostic pillars. And so it is ultimately an apostasy and the establishment of the religion of man, not of God. And God and man tries to become himself God and replace the true God. Maybe they say in God we trust, but in which God? Who is this God in whom we trust? It is the God of my ego, can be God, or my wishes, my desires are my God. So it is oftentimes. Or the devil, the Satan, ultimately.
There's a point I should have made yesterday in my talk, this whole idea of discernment, accompaniment, how in complex situations the negative precepts of the natural law might not be feasibly adhered to, and so on and so forth. Notice, though, that this whole novelty in the realm of morality is being confined to the sixth commandment, not to any other sins that one might commit. So you won't see Francis saying that because of complex circumstances, when we need to accompany those who are harming the environment by filling the cycle, or you want to see someone saying, well, when someone robs a bank, point of a gun, we can't really say that he sinned mortally because there are good elements in his conduct. He was courteous to the teller. Didn't actually shoot anybody, or if he did, he only winged the person. So the mystery here is, and this is from the Fatima perspective, the sins that the flesh is most prone to, the Lady Fatima warned are the cause of more souls being lost than any other, are precisely and only the sins that are the subject of this campaign to get rid of the idea of intrinsic evil and exceptionless commandments. Otherwise, of course, when the sin is something that Francis would like to condemn, there are no excuses.
Just to add to that, in terms of the Fatima message, I'm sure many of you have read the letter that Sister Lucia wrote to Cardinal Caffarra. Regarding the family, she said, in the end, it's always going to be about the family. The final battle will always be about the family. So she said, but take courage because the Immaculate Heart will triumph. It's what Paul said about the body being the temple of the Holy Spirit. Every other sin is committed outside the body. So, yes, the reality, the dignity of the human person, the sexual person, is always going to be a flashpoint, because the family is the one gift of God that will keep us from becoming egomaniacs. You can't promote the God of my ego if you live in a family. You'll be corrected. So, to get rid of the family is necessary for the triumph of evil. And so, to get rid of the family, you just have to destabilize the sexual dimension of a person. So it's always focused on that. People say that the church is obsessed with the sixth commandment. Of course, the world is obsessed with the sixth commandment. And we have to, we're just responding to one of the core questions of the human person.
Thank you, Clancy. I want to thank our speakers for correctly and accurately assessing the degradation of our church and our civil affairs over the last year. You didn't sugarcoat it. I'm very thankful for that. The future, I understand, truth can only imply truth, and any false can only imply false. So, and you can have in Boolean logic truth plus truth and truth and false, and you still have false. So, I mean, we're in agreement here, Chris. So I wanted to put an exclamation point over the fact, and your very essential and timely point, that confusion teaching confusion in the absence of reason is in itself inherently and factually heresy. So our Pope, who has been skirting heresy by teaching confusion, is actually a heretic. And I haven't heard anybody clearly make that statement. But I think it's an essential one. But that isn't where I'm really confused. You gave us a teaser in your last sentence. You mentioned the reign of Mary. And I'm new to all this. I understand that the scholars of approved Marian visionaries look forward to the end of the reign of Satan and beginning of the reign of Mary. Okay, I'm an engineer. I know I'm searching for the spreadsheet. But what is the reign of Mary, and how would I know it if it hit me in the face? And I think this is really essential for our time, because we're approaching that moment.
Thank you for your narrowly focused question. As a lawyer, I appreciate that. Well, throughout her history, the Church has seen the rise and fall of civilizations. In the midst of the Dark Ages, the Benedictine Reform restored Catholic civilization. The Gregorian reforms, the great popes have led the way out of darkness into a new dawn, and it's happened more than once. Christopher Dawson has said that the great tradition, which is the Church, is always beneath the desert sands waiting to be irrigated. And when it is irrigated, it blooms again. So we're talking about something that's well-nigh miraculous. It would be the rescue of an entire civilization from the plight that it now finds itself in. That can be done gradually through the spread of the monasteries in the midst of the so-called Dark Ages. And it can be done dramatically at turning points like the Battle of Lepanto. And it can be done through a divine chastisement that incinerates the whole world and just leaves a remnant. So how it will happen, we don't know, but there will be a triumph of the Immaculate Heart, which would be a restoration of Catholic social order and the civilization that we now see in its death throes. And it's going to be a miracle of grace. I mean, Don Juan Donoso Cortez, the great counter-revolutionary thinker of the 19th century, pointed out that the conversion of our civilization in itself is a continuing miracle. The fact that we came out of pagan Rome, the Church spread throughout the world, converted an entire civilization to the faith without force of arms, is a miracle. The maintenance of that Catholic social order through the operation of God's grace in individuals manifesting itself in a society and a civilization is a continuing miracle of grace. Right now, the spigots of grace have been turned off, it seems, by men in the Church themselves who seem willing to commit suicide. And we're in the midst of darkness. If you want to read a description of darkness in the history of the Church, very much like what we're experiencing now, go read the essay on consulting the faithful in matters of doctrine by Cardinal Newman, where he talks about how in the midst of the Arian heresy, in nearly every corner of the Church, the situation was hopeless and dark and seemingly impossible to resolve. In that case, there was a gradual restoration, and I think Bishop Schneider can speak about this. He knows intimately the history of the way in which the Church was able to emerge from the Arian crisis. It can happen that way as a gradual development, or it can happen in a most dramatic way through some kind of worldwide catastrophe, which is probably what the Third Secret is about. Remember the vision that the Vatican published in 2000. It shows a devastated city. It shows a pope escaping the city, and obviously in a severely injured state. He makes his way to the top of a hill. He's executed there along with bishops, priests, and members of the laity. It's obviously a post-apocalyptic scenario. And what happens next? If you look at one of Sister Lucia's diaries, just published in her recent autobiography, published by the convent in Coimbra, she says that Our Lady consoled her by saying, in the end, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, after this conflagration that she sees. So it's, in a nutshell, it's a restoration of Catholic civilization. It can be gradual. It can take 2 centuries. It could take 2 weeks through some catastrophe. We don't know how it will happen, but we do know that it will.
before the end of it.
Hello, my name is Mauricio and I'm originally from Colombia, South America. I think one of the things Our Lady in Fatima also wants us to pay attention is to geography when she mentions countries, specifically Russia, Portugal. And one of the things that I think we all have in common is that we are all travelers. Some of us have to go certain distances to Mass. The bishop is traveling all over the world. You came to my hometown in Colombia, Medellin, to the neighborhood where I lived in Bogota. You met friends of mine. So even though we are from really far away, we have some intimate connections. And a lot of people in this conference have come from different states, have driven from Arizona, from Seattle, from Utah, from the East Coast. And it seems to me that Our Lady is asking us to be travelers, to be pilgrimages, to pay attention to what's going on in other places. And she signals Portugal very specifically. Why, I don't specifically know. So I guess my question is a bit, and I also noticed that when I was reading in some website about Fatima, the organizers from that website mentioned, and I think this was before Pope Francis became Pope, that there was a cardinal, that most cardinals and most bishops were not very much interested in Fatima. But there was one who was, and that was Pope Gregory. And he traveled to Fatima without having really a need to do so. So my question is, what do you read into Pope Francis' visit to Fatima? And is that something that could operate a change that doesn't seem humanly possible?
I'll say an initial word, and then the others probably want to speak about this, but we can't be unaware of the Pope's at least apparent devotion to Our Lady, that he prays before the icon in St. Mary Major, before and after major trips. And he's aware of the demonic, at least he speaks of the devil a lot. So what do we make of all this? Fulton Sheen spoke much about how Our Lady Fatima would be a means of conversion for the Muslims. That was his hope. And I think we have to trust Our Lady that she will bring about the conversion of all of us, but that this miracle that Chris is referring to will happen through Our Lady, and perhaps in a particular way through this Pope. So we shouldn't give up that Our Lady, that God through Our Lady can work through any miracle, even in a seemingly hopeless situation. So I think we need to pray for the Pope, yes, pray for the Pope especially, pray to Our Lady of Fatima for this particular Pope. So.
On that point, Our Lady of Quito, Our Lady of Big Success, said precisely that. She said, when things seem most hopeless, that will be the beginning of the restoration. Because Our Lady will demonstrate through her intercession her immense power as the mediatrix of all graces. Now, as far as the Marian devotion of the Pope, it's a matter of record that I was very optimistic about this pontificate precisely because of that. There's a video of me praising the new Pope. I wrote columns praising his Marian devotion. I'm not in this for my jollies of bashing Pope Francis. I want to be optimistic about the Pope, who's just been elected. And I was actually outraged that people were already criticizing him in ways that proved to be prophetic, of course. Well, I was outraged by it, thinking to myself, how can you do this? He was just elected hours ago. So if you go look at fatima.org, you'll see my column supporting Francis. There's a video of me in Rome, just outside the city, on the night of his election, expressing tremendous enthusiasm about him because of his Marian devotion. So maybe it'll be that in the midst of some sort of planetary catastrophe, it is Francis who becomes the instrument of all this. Who knows? All we do know is that it will happen. There will be a restoration, a period of peace, and then at some point we'll enter the true end times. The Antichrist will appear, Enoch and Elias will return to oppose him, and so forth. None of those events have happened, so we can't say we're at the end times. But we can say that we're anticipating the triumph of the Immaculate Heart.
if legitimate bishops are replaced by illegitimate ones, for example, in China that may happen. So what would happen to the souls of those who obey the new bishops, and what happens to those who don't obey them?
That's not the legal book. Well, when the Pope replaces the legitimate bishops with the illegitimate bishops, the illegitimate bishops become legitimate bishops because of the appointment of the Pope. So, have you understood? When the Pope, and this would be humanly spoken a sad situation when the Pope, those bishops in China who were faithful and suffered for the faith, will be replaced by those who are collaborators in some way with the communist government. It is humanly spoken a very great injustice. But even though they will be illegitimate bishops because the Pope appointed them, this is the issue. And then the people have to obey them. As Jesus told, you have to do what they say, but do not imitate their life. So they have the authority. But we have also, I mean, in the Western world, there are bishops who are in charge, but who are not more Catholic in their faith. They are not more Catholic. But they have the office of bishops appointed by the Pope because of their behavior, because of their words, and so on. So it would be a similar situation in China, which we have to some extent already in the West.
I would like to thank personally Bishop Snyder for joining us here in Sacramento. You mentioned about Martin Luther the 13th, or Luther the 10th, modernism, anti-modernism. That is the synthesis of all heresies. And I think under this pontificate we hear murmurings of heresy. When does it become a heretical act? You're not counting Pope is doing something. Maybe you can enlighten us.
Well, to be a formal heretic, it is required a church law in order that you can say someone is a formal heretic. He has to deny a revealed truth and a dogma of faith. So renounce this or publicly doubt, and this heretical action has to be obstinate. So it has to be an obstination. So it has to be repeated. And to be obstinate, it has to be it requires an admonition. So it is, in the case of a pope, very difficult to concretely to state that he is a heretic. And to my opinion, Pope Francis did not make a formal heretical act, thanks be to God, in the form of the canon law. So, and therefore he is not an heretic in this sense. But maybe he helps to spread heresies. This is another question. So, as it was in the history of the Church, with some popes who helped. Honorius I, for example, on John the 22nd also. And it was only a period of time, and then came another pope.
On that point, there's an important essay at Verate Celli by Dr. John Lamont, world-renowned Catholic scholar, and he says that while Divorce Letizia involves certain heretical propositions. This does not make Pope Francis guilty of the canonical crime of heresy. This is an important point because the crime of heresy is the only offense for which a pope can and should be removed from office. In order to commit the canonical crime of heresy, it is not sufficient to publicly state that a heretical proposition is true, meaning that some adulterers can receive Holy Communion. One must also refuse to retract this proposition when warned by ecclesiastical authority. But the Pope doesn't have an ecclesiastical superior. And the only attempt to grapple with this problem that I've seen as a layman who is not a trained theologian is in the literature of doctors of the church, such as Robert Bellarmine, about this idea of perhaps an imperfect council could be convened, and they could say that the Pope ought to retract his errors, and failing this, they could theoretically declare that he has deposed himself. But no one can judge the Pope in the sense of passing a sentence on him and declaring his see vacant. So I think that's the answer to that concern.
Thank you. When you all were talking about a gray area, it reminded me of an article I read this week. How close President Richard Nixon came to granting himself a blanket pardon at the height of his troubles, and what kind of gray area and confusion that would have caused. I have one question for His Excellency. I read a profound geopolitical analysis recently that stated that Russia right now is desperate and is set to make very aggressive military moves very soon because their window of opportunity to defend their integrity and their borders is fast closing. Decades of Marxism, the destruction of the family and the culture, the abortion and low death rate, and also the high incidence of alcoholism. Their population is shrinking so quickly that they cannot defend themselves as a country. They have great threats from the west and from the south as well as the east. And if you could comment on that. One question for Mr. Farrar after that. When can we expect a sequel to your excellent book, Liberty, the God That Failed? Thank you.
Well, I'm not acquainted with the political situation in Russia, therefore I cannot give an answer to your question. But I only can state what I know, that since the fall of the communism, or more than 25 years, the Russian government became a promoter of Christianity. It was before the Soviet Union was a promoter of atheism. And it is evident. So in 25 years, in Russia have been built or rebuilt or renewed 20,000 churches, building Orthodox churches. It is impressive. And have been built 1,000 monasteries where there is day and night prayer, the Orthodox monks and nuns. So it is a sign of, in some way, of renewal, spiritual renewal of this country. This we have to recognize this. We cannot deny this. And the government, the Russian government is promoting. They have chaplains in all the armies and in the prisons. So it is good, some way. And then the Russian government made a law which prohibits homosexual propaganda. It is good. Which country in the West do this? The contrary, they promote homosexual propaganda. Even in the schools, with the gender ideology already implementing in the school, in all Western countries, in all the South American countries, and I think also in the United States, they start to implement the program in the public schools, the gender ideology. And this is communism. Gender ideology is the last phase of communism which Marx wrote. The aim of the communism was You can read this in the writing of the Marx, in Engels, that the last goal of communism is to destroy completely family. And now we are witnessing in the West the destruction of the family. And in Russia they are promoting family now. At least I can state these as facts. Political situation I cannot judge, so I don't know exactly. Then now, Mr. Ferrari.
I'm hoping to have it completed by the end of the summer, but who knows? It's substantially written, but that last third is the toughest part. I've been pecking away at it, we'll see.
I have a question about the effect of elevating the Amors Laetitia to the apostolic epistle. What does that mean in terms of the magisterium? What does that mean in terms of what is it in, the infallible magisterium? Was it an attempt to make that magisterium or infallible? Or how does that all relate with its effect as heresy? Just what is the interaction of all those things? Because it seems to just the lay observer that it was clearly an attempt to bolster the teaching. And so not only is it spreading in terms of practice and from one diocese to the other, but it seems like there was an attempt to actually give it greater authority. And what is that authority, and how should we as lay people see that?
Yes, we have to know the catechism very well, that the infallibility of papal or other documents of the magisterium are very rare and very precise, circumscribed. So in this case, even the so-called authentic magisterium is not infallible, means is fallible, according to the definition. And so there is for me no problem that Pope Francis raised his approval of the norms of the Argentinian bishops to the level of authentic magisterium, since authentic magisterium can be fallible and was in the past fallible. I have no problem with this. I stick to the immutable magisterium of 2000 years. It has more weight than one epistle of Pope Francis, which is even classified as authentic magisterium. For example, we can make a research in the church history. There was, for example, an authentic magisterium text, only one I quote as example, from the 15th century of Pope Innocent VIII. And he, in his famous bull of the witches, so he spoke there about the existence of witches to persecute the witches and so on, and he started promoting such insane persecutions of women who were accused as witches. And so this was a bad situation, and all serious Catholic historians, even before the council, they said this document of Innocent VIII in the 5th century, even it was an authentic magisterium, it is a shame for the entire history of the church to be guilty of the persecution of so many innocent women who were burned in the marketplaces as so-called witches and so on. This is a historical fact of an authentic magisterium text, which is now not recognized.
I would actually address a question to the bishop and the father, this whole vexing question of the authentic magisterium. To me, and you can please correct me if I'm going wrong here, to me it seems problematical at best to speak of a fallible ordinary magisterium. Because when the extraordinary magisterium defines the dogma of the faith, it looks to what the ordinary magisterium has always taught, which is the universal ordinary magisterium, the constant teaching of the church since the time of the apostles. So if we were to say that there's a fallible ordinary magisterium which can in particular cases err, then how do we know that any pronouncement of the ordinary magisterium over the past 2,000 years is not itself fallible? So my objection is, can we not say that when we speak of the authentic magisterium, short of the dogmatic definition, we mean what the church has always taught, If it's a novelty, if the church has never taught this, or if it's something, a disciplinary matter that lasts for 10 years or so in a particular epoch, if it's truly novel, and it happens to be, by virtue of its novelty, be wrong, then we can't even say that it's part of the magisterium as such, because the magisterium is the teaching office of the church. And how could the teaching office of the church ever teach a falsehood?
Well, I have to correct you. I have not said that the ordinary magisterium is fallible. I said the authentic magisterium is fallible. So we have to distinguish between the solemn magisterium ex cathedra and the dogmatic definitions of the Pope or of an ecumenical council are infallible. Second, the ordinary, and I have to not only to say ordinary, but the ordinary universal magisterium. So the ordinary universal magisterium is also infallible. And what means the ordinary universal magisterium? What does it mean? It does mean that the entire magisterium of all times, starting with the apostles, in every place, in all times, were teaching the same or doing the same in practice. Constantly the same. This is infallible, even when it is not proclaimed ex cathedra. So, and then the third one is the authentic magisterium. We can say, there's another expression for authentic magisterium, is the daily magisterium. Daily magisterium, or authentic. And this has no characteristic of infallibility. It can be infallible. Even in authentic magisterium, usually, when the authentic magisterium, an encyclical or a letter of the Pope, he repeats only the constant tradition of the Church. So he is also proclaiming infallibility because he is repeating what the Church did. And so I hope that this is now clear.
I'll sit over here. Your Excellency, is the authentic magisterium a term that first appears in the documents of the Second Vatican Council? And if so, would you not say we have another gray area now, or a third term is being introduced?
It is a good remark of you. I'm already thinking about this. And I think that the current crisis of the Church maybe bring us, the entire Church, to reflect deeper and to fix concretely what does mean the authentic or the daily magisterium of the Pope and how it has to be. To my opinion, a future Pope has to issue a dogmatic document where he is stating concretely that when a Pope is teaching something contrary, evidently, to the constant magisterium of the Church, that the bishops and the priest has not to obey him. This has to state a future Pope. Say, please, when I will teach you another thing which God prohibits, which is contrary to the entire tradition, please do not follow me and correct me. This would be a beautiful attitude of a Pope. I hope it will become.
I just want to add that people, of course, ask priests a lot, what do we make of Amoris Laetitia and this latest move of putting the Argentinian bishop's response letter into the Acta. Those are political moves, and politics operates on the level of persuasion and opinion, and unfortunately this Vatican, the current group, the Vatican is operating more on a political level than a doctrinal level, but that makes it somewhat simple for us. Following the distinctions that have been made, we just have to be calm and say yes, but nothing, there's been no utterance of the universal ordinary magisterium, and just leave it at that. And that's the way the bishops who have correctly interpreted the teaching on marriage from Amoris Laetitia have simply said that. There's nothing, how can a bishop say there's nothing contrary to the magisterium in Amoris Laetitia? Well, he can say that, because nothing specifically contrary, or correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems we can still take confidence in the fact that the magisterium hasn't changed. Nothing contrary to the magisterium has specifically been said. It's been implied, but you can ignore implications. Implications are not how the church works.
You know, this whole question of the universal ordinary magisterium, Father Harrison, I think it was Father Harrison, mentioned the famous article by Grisey and John Ford on arguing that Humani Vitae was infallible. And you can take a look at that article to realize how complex sometimes some of these issues are in terms of going back with a slant of positive theology and tracing the line all the way forward. But this is where I think they're already, if you watch what they're saying after the Argentinian letter of the bishops was put in Francis's act, there's already this sleight of hand going on where they're trying to confuse the authentic magisterium or the fallible ordinary magisterium with the ordinary universal magisterium. Because what they're saying is, and this goes back to, they're insisting that this is authentic development. And of course, we read, I'm sure many people have read Cardinal Mueller's essay in First Things a few days ago, where he really does a good job of going through that. But they're insisting on that. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, now this is part of the authentic magisterium, so therefore it must be believed. But of course, something that's only relegated to authentic or daily magisterium only needs to be received with respect and religious submission, which means that it's not infallible. But what they're saying, they're presenting it as because of this authentic development. So this is where the sleight of hand is really going to happen, where they're presenting this as part of the ordinary universal magisterium. To Father Ilo's point, whether they ever say that or not will be interesting, because I think, they know that if they go that a bit further, they're going to run into some problems, but they're going to pass it off. They're already kind of passing it off as somehow authentic magisterium has to be followed, which they're saying, very clearly. And of course, authentic magisterium doesn't have to be followed. It needs to be received with religious submission and respect, given a fair examination. So I mean, it's good. I think the confusion is not going to get clearer. I think it's going to get even more gray.
Clarification on the Chinese bishops. So the illegitimate become legitimate, but if they're in cahoots, better terminology, with the Chinese, with the communists, and they're going along with the forced abortion, sterilization, contraception, one child policy, how could a faithful Catholic, and they say to the laity, well, you just have to go along with it because that's the way it is. How could they go along with anything that's against the teaching of the church, even if the bishops are now legitimate, but they are parroting the government's doctrine?
Well, in this case, the faithful cannot obey to these bishops in this specific case. But I hope that a Catholic bishop, even in China, will not promote abortion and so on. But if he will do, then the priest and the Chinese Catholics has to resist him. He continues being their bishop, but they have to resist him. For example, there are, as I mentioned, there are other bishops, for example, Cardinal Marx in Germany, in München. He spoke openly to bless homosexual couples. He is a cardinal, and so in this case, it is for me also a kind of a communist bishop. Even he is a cardinal in Germany, in München, who promotes such a horrible proposal. So we have not only in China these cases.
Well, there is the historical example of Bishop Robert Grosseteste, the English prelate who was under Innocent IV. And Grosseteste said that the exercise of papal power must be to build up the church, not to destroy it. And he received a certain number of ridiculous commands from Innocent IV, including Innocent's nephew, who was completely incompetent and too young to be a bishop. He made a bishop. And Grosseteste said, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that." So there may be cases where prelates can legitimately resist a destructive papal command. The Pope is not an absolute monarch, as Benedict XVI said, not an absolute monarch whose will is law. And the doctors of the church, say Robert Bellarmine is the most conspicuous example, who said that if a Pope is attempting to destroy the church through a destructive command, not only must you not obey him, you must impede the execution of his will. So yeah, this is a matter of conscience, of course, but a rightly formed conscience. So I always use a hypothetical example. Suppose the Pope said, "I would like every marble altar in the church to be destroyed with jackhammers within 2 weeks." Obviously the bishops would say, "This is madness and we're not going to do it." And now we're being told that illegitimate bishops consecrated without a papal mandate, who are therefore in schism, will be recognized even though they're subordinate to a Chinese communist government. Meanwhile, ironically enough, the legitimate underground Catholic bishops are prohibited from consecrating successors under the same law that's going to be relaxed as to the illegitimate ones. It's just madness. And I would say they could make a case for conscientious disobedience. If they're commanded to surrender their legitimate sees to a communist puppet, it's nonsense. How could they consent to that? Unless it's clear that this particular bishop, who was going to be given the see occupied by a legitimate bishop, swears absolute loyalty to Rome and all the teachings of the church, and renounces any primary loyalty to the Chinese government, which isn't going to happen.
Yeah, this question is apropos of our discussion of magisterium and infallibility here. Getting back again to Humani Vitae, is it the case that Humani Vitae is ex cathedra, or is it ordinary and universal, or is it authentic? Is it infallible? If so, what is the basis of the infallibility? If it is ex cathedra, then does someone who rejects it become susceptible of material heresy?
To my opinion, Humani Vitae is not ex cathedra, formally, it is evident. Humani Vitae is infallible because of the universal ordinary magisterium of 2000 years. This is already infallible, and Paul VI only stated that this is infallible because the church always taught so, everywhere. And the same did John Paul II with his apostolic letter on the impossibility of ordaining women to the priesthood. John Paul II also stated only this was the infallible teaching of the universal ordinary magisterium. It was not a technical act of ex cathedra. So I hope and I wish that a future Pope should issue a kind of dogmatic letter, where he ex cathedra explicitly says, "Now I am proclaiming the following infallible truths in an explicit, solemn manner, ex cathedra." And then he can name all these truths which are today confused and denied in one letter, as did the Council of Trent, and say, who says this anathema sit, and so on. And says this is to avoid every doubt. He has to my opinion, to add in the end, this is an ex cathedra decision, point. That no one can more doubt, and then everyone who will contradict these teachings or doubt will be a formal heretic.
Thank you. I'm not sure which of our three speakers could answer my question, but on the subject of the Chinese bishops, on the face of it, it looks pretty outrageous what's being done to the faithful versus the party-supported bishops. But it reminds me of something happened called Gallicanism, where I think Dr. Ferrara seems to know what I'm talking about, around the 17th century or 18th century, where the French monarch demanded the right to appoint bishops, and that crisis was resolved. But I'm not sure if what I'm saying is analogous, could somebody comment about how did the Gallicanism get resolved, basically?
Yes, I mean, it was not maybe the Gallicanism, the parallel to the Chinese situation now is, to my opinion, the following. It is the Napoleon Concordate in the French Revolution demanded of all priests and bishops to make an oath of fidelity to the Freemasonic atheistic government of France in those times. And those who will not do this, they were removed from the office, and so on. But unfortunately, there were a number of bishops who did the oath of fidelity to this French atheistic Masonic government in the French Revolution time. And so they became the bishops' seats of the French Revolutionary government because of their oath. But there were already legitimate Catholic bishops who were appointed before the French Revolution and who renounced to make an oath of fidelity. And the Pope prohibited under the excommunication to make an oath of fidelity. But the problem came after, because when the Pope Pius VII made a concordate with Napoleon, the Emperor Napoleon, tried to, in some way, to resolve the question with the Church and to mitigate this situation. But in the concordate, Napoleon asked as a conditio sine qua non of the Holy See that those bishops, the constitutional bishops of the French Revolution, be recognized, and that the legitimate bishops should renounce their office. And the same situation is now in China. And unfortunately, the Pope yielded and accepted this demand of Napoleon. Unfortunately. And he asked the legitimate bishops to renounce. Pius VII, 200 years ago, we had already a similar situation, but the consequence of this was that there came out a schism in France, which was called La Petite Église, the little church. So there was a group of faithful and priests who did not subject themselves to this concordate of the Pope, and they continued, unfortunately, a sectarian way of life. So this was already but to my opinion, it was, for me, a pity that Pius VII yielded. He could wait 15 years, and then Napoleon was broken down, and then there would be no humiliation of the legitimate bishops, and then the revolutionary government was thrown down, you know, at 1814 with the Congress of Vienna, and there was the restoration of the situation before the French Revolution. So to wait only some decades, and this was, to my opinion, an error of the Holy See, and it is committing now maybe the same error.
I have to get up easy, but there's a father, I think Father Spadaro, the Jesuit editor of Civilit Catholica, wrote a piece that seemed to be at odds with Catholic tradition, and it was commented on by television personality Raymond Arroyo on EWTN with his, what he calls the papal posse. Yes, Father Gerald Murray was very solidly conservative and traditional, and a layman, Raymond Arroyo. And they heavily criticized this piece that was authored by Father Spadaro. I don't know if he's a bishop or father, but subsequently it was reported on the internet that Father Spadaro had threatened Raymond Arroyo with an interdict because of his opposition to this peace. So could you, worthy Bishop and Fathers, comment on what is an interdict and the appropriateness of somebody connected with the Vatican to threaten public persons who disagree with what comes out of the Vatican?
Well, first, Father Padaro is a priest. He has no authority to make interdict and so on, but well, he suggested that he may be interdicted. Interdiction is a church punishment, penalty, that a person cannot receive the sacraments. He is not excommunicated, but cannot receive the sacraments. Or some place of worship is interdicted, that in this place there cannot be mass. It can only do a bishop or a pope for serious reasons. And the church canonical penalty has to be to make admonition and so on. Well, but in general, this is an attitude I would respond to him. Dear Father Padaro, I thought that the time of Inquisition already passed. And you are restoring the Inquisition time. And it's strange.
So also I think we need to be real precise on what actually is happening in some. To know that Father Spadaro is doesn't have that authority, but the actual, it was a tweet from a member of the International Monetary Fund. I'm not sure how that comes into play, but Father Spadaro simply retweeted that using his higher profile to make it more public. But again, this is the level of politics, and so we just have to be calm and say, well, Father Spadaro has no authority, neither does the man of the International Monetary Fund to make an interdict, and what Raymond Arroyo said should be evaluated for Father Murray on its own merits, rather than simply casting words, stones at us. These are just red herrings these are smoke screens that are thrown out. But the difficulty is, of course, that most people hear these things and say, oh, Raymond Arroyo's been excommunicated. So we must do our best to make precise information available.
First, I'd like to make a comment about Monsignor William Smith. Some of you may remember him. A very well-known author and speaker. He taught us at St. Joseph Seminary in New York for many years. And he used to say often that all social engineering begins with verbal engineering. All social engineering begins with verbal engineering. And most of these talks today, in one way or another, relate to that. We're talking about feasibility. In our society, for example, speaking about sodomy as being gay. I give some examples. Abortion is pro-choice. And perversion is transgender. I mean, there's all kinds of this. So this is a way of, if you want to move from capitalistic society to socialism and communism, a lot of it has to do with verbal engineering. To destroy the Catholic Church, which is the only institution that I know of on earth that defends the absolute truth of things, and the people can know truth for certainty, is the Catholic Church. And so that is one of the reasons why the Catholic Church is attacked, I think, so much, and through the centuries, and always will be. In imitation of our Lord, the Church stands for and teaches the truth, that man can know the truth and know it for certain. And we live in a relativistic society. Much of what's been said here today is reduced to that, it seems to me, that in our society, it's infiltrated the Catholic Church, is relativism. As the Bishop has mentioned that several times. So I'll put a question to His Excellency. You know, the famous syllabus of errors. I've often wondered whether in our contemporary society do we need a new syllabus of errors, of the errors that are common in society?
Yeah, thank you, Father Baker, for your comment. I'm saying we urgently need a new syllabus, urgently. Because we have now in the secular world, they are producing a lot of syllabus, you know. Syllabus means a list. The literal translation syllabus, it's an enumeration. And so you have an enumeration of warnings about diseases. Please avoid these, in order not to be sick or not to be contagious. The ministries of health publish a lot of syllabus, very precise. Please avoid these. But to save the body, but to save the soul, we have to have a syllabus, a list. Please avoid these, in order to save your soul. This is syllabus. This is the meaning of a papal document, a syllabus. And so, we are witnessing this tremendous confusion, which is unique in the history of the church, we are now witnessing. And so, it is urgently necessary that a pope publishes a very precise syllabus as a good spiritual physician. The pope and the bishop, we are doctors of the soul, and we have to give them the protection for the eternal life, and this is a good syllabus. So, I mean, no sane person will be scandalized when the public ministry of health will publish a very precise list of dangers, of sicknesses and contagious sickness. No one will be scandalized. There is a syllabus, a list. Why should we be scandalized when there would be a precise list of dangers for the soul? You have to be thankful for such a syllabus.
Also, just to point out the fact that there is no syllabus at this time indicates or implies that we've lost belief in the soul. If we did believe in the soul, we would be working hard to preserve it.
At the foundation of examining these difficulties, you have to have a clear definition of the magisterium. Is there a book that you can refer me to? I looked it up in the catechism. The terms used today: solemn magisterium, ordinary, universal magisterium, authentic, daily magisterium. And as a layperson, if I'm asked to go out and to discuss, engage members of other communities, faiths, etc., local priests, ordinaries, but yet I have nothing to point to. It's like I'm a lawyer without law or a constitution or books of precedent cases. If there is no book, would one of you please write one?
Well, I mean, the basic explanation of magisterium you can find in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. There is an old passage about this in the Catechism. But I am agreeing, it is still necessary, as we already spoke here, to clarify most precisely what is authentic and daily magisterium and so on. And I hope that it should be done in future by a pope or by a council. And so, but the theologians can prepare this already and to write books, and so this is good.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Just
just a quick question to Your Excellency, Bishop. Yesterday, you talked about liturgy. And I was just wondering, as a layman, in the middle of all these things, all these words, and isn't it enough for me as a Christian just to participate in liturgy, pray the rosary? I was thinking, isn't that enough to sort of just help with the situation? Do I need to study all these things? And it all just seems too much.
You are in some way correct. It is sufficient for us to know our catechism as well. You have to study your catechism, the basic. You have to know our faith. And to live the liturgy in the fullness, it is the traditional liturgy, the fullness of liturgy and the sacraments. And to strive to holiness, to spiritual life, and to give your witness in your place where you are. This is the basic contribution. And pray, as we told, for the Church, for the Pope, and so on, that God may intervene. But nevertheless, it is necessary for those who can do this, because there are different gifts. When there are people, even lay people, who have the gift to study more deeply these truths and to defend these, to write books and articles to defend the truth, it's good. It's already a contribution. And Vatican II encouraged all the lay people to engage in the church life and even to give contributions with their own study to promote the Catholic faith. Not only by their life, but also when they are capable, when they are able to write something, contribution. And so it is in this way, I think, we have to all together contribute, everyone in his place.
I was watching like an SSPX video, and it said that if you couldn't attend a traditional Latin Mass, and your Novus Ordo Mass was doing it irreverently, then you had no Sunday obligation necessary to attend the Novus Ordo Mass. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that concept and idea.
Well, the new Mass is valid, of course, and but you know that today it's so a chaos in the new Mass parishes all over the world that you can find almost in every parish another rite of the new Mass. It's so celebrated in so different manners, and so of course there are new Mass rites very reverently celebrated. Thanks be to God, in not so many places, unfortunately, but there are, and this is beautiful. And so, in this case, you can, when there is in your parish a very irreverent Mass, I would not go to this Mass, no. But I would drive to another place where is a reverent New Order Mass or where is a traditional Mass. So you are here, we lived in the Soviet Union, I know. We had for several years no masses because the 1,000 kilometers was the next church. I mean, it is, and then we had to drive every Sunday 70 miles for the Mass, and we did this. So there is no choice. So, but here in the Western world, you have cars, you have, it is more easier to move yourself. And so to drive.
I don't have a question, but a quick comment. I just say this on the mic in case other people want to. You know, the theology professors at Ave Maria in Florida had the same issue about there's no text for a magisterium, so they had Cardinal Dulles write one, and it was one of the last books that he wrote, and it's called Dulles. It's one of his last books, and it's the best popular treatment. It goes through all of these terminological issues and you know, helps sort the historical things out.
I have read, Your Excellency, that in 2010 you suggested a syllabus of errors that would list abuses of the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, but also any repercussions that have come to you because of that, and also because of the statement in December about the indissolubility of marriage.
Well, the first on the syllabus which I proposed, I had, then after this I had some letters I got from priests and faithful who asked me to make a text of a syllabus. I said, I cannot, I am only a bishop. But I said to them, why not start you to make a syllabus? You are faithful, you know the faith. Study, make a group, and propose a syllabus, a text. And so you can prepare already the faithful, the priest, for a future papal syllabus. Why not? This is the first. And another repercussions of the statement which we published on the sacred marriage in December. Well, until now, they only, with us three together, we are now 10 bishops in the church who are publicly gave their name and signed and asked that their name be published. So we are now only 10 bishops, but at least 10. And it is in the case of truth, it is not a case of numbers, but the truth itself will shine. Even in the Arian crisis, you know, there were only a couple of bishops. You could count them on your fingers in the 4th century. And even so, they were supported by the faithful. And St. Athanasius said to the faithful Catholics, we have the Arians, the public bishops in those times. They have the churches, the buildings. But we have the faith. So today they have the administrative power, the established administrative power, but we have the faith. And this is more powerful. This will last.
Maybe one more question. There's a
I used to live in Brazil as well, in the Diocese of Santa Maria. And I want to ask you, Your Excellency, coming from a diocese that's also named Santa Maria, the bishop there at the time, Igor Schreiter, he had promoted the Fifth Marian dogma, Maria's Corodentrix. And he spoke with Pope St. John Paul II and asked him why he didn't promulgate the Fifth Marian dogma. And St. John Paul said that it might alter the relationships with the Protestants. Is this something that you believe in, and do you think it would help to promote and ask the Pope, as many theologians have already done, to promote this dogma? In other words, seek the development of Marian doctrine as a possible hope for the institutions?
Well, the dogmatizations of truth, I think, have to be prepared organically, and it should be spread and live in the entire church, the truth, and we have to precisely to define what is this truth precisely, because this will be an act of faith. So we cannot remain in an ambiguous manner. So we have to, what is? So, to my opinion, maybe it could be defined the spiritual maternity of Our Lady towards all the faithful. She is the mother, our mother. She is the mother of God. This is a dogma. But there is not yet a dogma that she is our mother. And this will be beautiful to be a dogma that Our Lady is our mother. Really, the maternity of her. And even universal maternity towards all people who were saved by the blood of her Son. And I think that such a dogma, concrete, but it has to be very carefully studied, and this conviction that Our Lady is our mother, I think it's very spread in the people of God. is not Mother of God and our Mother. So, but maybe it takes time to be more spread in the entire church, this conviction. And then I think has to become spontaneously demand of the faithful and bishops in the future to proclaim this as a dogma. But first, it should be good, to my opinion, to establish a liturgical feast for the entire church, the maternity of Our Lady towards Christians and toward human beings. The universal maternity of Our Lady, the spiritual maternity, could be good to establish a feast, liturgical feast, and then make a litany and so on. So it should be organically. To my opinion, you cannot make a dogma only. It has to be prepared. And I think it takes time. And then will flow graces.
Thank you very much for all your questions. They were very, very excellent questions, and they come on the ground. So thank you, Your Excellency, and Father Ilo and Chris for responding so fully to all of our good questions.